Hey, brand builder, Rory Vaden here. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this interview. As always, it's our honor to provide it to you for free. And wanted to let you know there's no big sales pitch or anything coming at the end. However, if you are someone who is looking to build and monetize your personal brand, we would love to talk to you and get to know you a little bit and hear about some of your dreams and visions and share with you a little bit about what we're up to see if we might be a fit. So if you're interested in a free strategy call with someone from our team, we would love to hear from you. You can do that at brandbuildersgroup.com/podcall, brandbuildersgroup.com/podcall. We hope to talk to you soon.
I would consider my first major media appearance ever to have been in an outlet called Networking Times Magazine. And I want to say I was maybe 22 years old when I got a full, 3-page spread story that was written about me. That was huge because it was huge for my confidence. We got some great reach out of the article, and then we included screenshots of that article in the book proposal that we ended up using to get our first book deal for Take the Stairs. Well, the writer of that article is the man that you are about to meet today. His name is John David Mann. And so we have been friends literally since the beginning of my career. And then he's written about 30 books. They've been translated into 35 languages. They've sold millions of copies. I still to this day, my favorite book, and John has written so many since then, but The Go-Giver is my favorite book. He co-authored that with my friend Bob Burg, and that book has just, been one of the top 5 books of all time for me that I've ever read. John's written several fables, and just released his first fiction book, which is pretty fascinating. We'll hear about that. And he also has a new ebook out that's exclusively only as an ebook called How to Write Good, or at least Gooder, which I love. And so anyways, my old friend, it's really great to have you. I can't wait to pick your brain on some of the writing secrets. Thanks for making time for us.
It's great. It's a cliche to say, but it has been too long. But the time is just right. So yeah, good to be here. Good to see you.
Well, and I feel like, we kind of have touched base every couple years for now, 20 years. And it's like a few years will go by, and then it's like you got a new book or we're doing something. And, tell me about... So I want to hear just about the fiction book quickly. I mean, I want to understand your writing process, or maybe you can merge these together. What I'm really interested in knowing, this podcast is all for personal brands. A lot of what we talk about is digital marketing and branding and positioning and messaging. And we actually don't talk that much about writing, at its true core, writing a story, creating content. And you've done this nonfiction, you've done fables, now you've done fiction. And my only goal today is to try to steal all your secrets about your writing process to get those out of you for free. But you just did your first fiction book. So I'm curious, why did you do that? How is that different from the other stuff that you have done? And what are some of the lessons that have come out of that experience?
Yeah, it's in the course of all these books, as you know, there've been a lot of different kinds of books. I've written a handful of memoirs, which is interesting. It's basically telling somebody else, tell me your story, and I will make it into a book. And so when you write a memoir, you're taking an existing story that's reality, that really happened to this person, right? But you're still trying to find the story in it. So in a sense, you're taking that person's story and you're rewriting it as you're not making stuff up, but you're choosing stuff, you're framing stuff. It's like making a biopic if you're a movie director, right? And you're going to write about, Freddie Mercury, or you're going to write about, Gandhi, or whoever you're going to write about. What events do you choose? How do you string them together? So you're fashioning a story. And about writing in general, my belief is that no matter what you're writing, whether you're writing somebody else's memoir or a straight nonfiction book, like some of the books I've done that are sort of business nonfiction concept books, or a parable, a fable, clearly, or a novel like this one that just came out, or hey, if you're writing a blog post, or you're writing a Facebook post, or a LinkedIn article, or you're writing a promotional piece, you're telling a story. You've got a beginning, middle, and end. You're creating an arc. You're creating some suspense. You're creating some interest. You're creating some intrigue, and you're answering some questions, or at least you're posing some questions. It's all kind of the same thing. I mean, they're really different, really different forms. But there's this basic sort of storytelling DNA imprint we've all got inside us, huddled around a campfire or huddled around, in a cave, however long ago, hearing about the saber-toothed tiger that one of us killed. We've all still kind of got this tell me what happened next gene in us. And that's what expresses itself in story in any medium. So yeah, the novel was a wild and completely different experience in one sense. As I was telling you before we started that I feel like I've been climbing these lovely little hills for 15 years, and all of a sudden I'm like with an oxygen mask on the top of Mount Everest, climbing this novel, saying, "How do I get up here and how do I get down?" Especially, how do I get down without breaking my neck? Because 400 plus page novel. That's a thriller on top of it, which means you can't let up the tension for a moment. You can't let up the suspense for a moment. You can't let up the pace for keeping someone's attention so they're turning pages for 460 pages. It's a whole different challenge and a whole different world than writing The Goal Giver, which has to do the same thing, but in this little tiny form. It's like The Goal Giver is like a miniature.
I know, and a lot of your books are so short, like the fables. You can sit down and read them in one sitting. Like 400 pages is totally different.
Yeah, it's totally different. By the way, out of all the writing I've done, I've come to a point where the two things I love to do most are the fables and the novels. So that's my career path. I love those parables. I love taking a life message or a life principle, and spinning that into a story that feels real, that feels compelling, about people that you come to care about. And if a parable, I say it in the book, How to Write Good, I say parables are really easy to write poorly.
Yeah, I mean, that, like, to me, it freaks me out because, I just think the power of a parable, like I think of AJ, so my wife, my business partner, our CEO of Brand Builders Group, she always makes fun of me for reading boring business books. She calls them boring business books. And she loves fables because she gets hooked on the story, and she loves to read fiction. And so her favorite business books are fables, and some of mine are too. I think of like the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team from Pat Lencioni, and then of course you guys did a whole bunch in the Go Giver series.
Yes,
but so can you? So here's my question. Here's what I don't think I'm very good at, and I think a lot of people aren't good at, both in writing and speaking, is how do you create suspense? Like, you just mentioned that for 400 pages, you can't let off the gas for a second. How do you, what is suspense? How do you create it? And then, how do you know how to write it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that, I'm kind of framing my thoughts in the parable space at the moment, because there's the Go Giver books. I had the opportunity to write the sequel to Who Moved My Cheese, which was a experience on the other end of the spectrum, right? Because Steel Fear, the novel, is like 450-page thriller about a serial killer on an aircraft carrier, a wholly different thing. Who Moved My Cheese is written at the level of a child. Spencer Johnson wrote children's books. And he actually wrote literally children's books in addition to his adult books. And so to write in the style of Spencer Johnson and write a sequel to Who Moved My Cheese, it's called Out of the Maze, was like, I had to put your brain into that container, but there's still suspense in there. And there's suspense in the Go Giver, because there's, in the Go Giver, For those of you who haven't read it, there's this character called the Connector, and you don't know who he is. And there's this character called the Friday Guest, and you don't know who he is. And Joe has got this problem, and you can't imagine how he's going to solve it. And there are these various questions that you don't really see how they're going to resolve themselves, but they do. The requirement for the ending of a great mystery or a great suspense novel, or even a book, I would say, like The Go-Giver, requirement is that when you reach the end, you go, wow, I never saw that coming. And yet, the moment you see it, you go, of course, that had to happen. It has to be inevitable, but a complete surprise at the same time. If it's a surprise and you go like, that came out of left field, I have no idea how that happened, that's not fair. You broke the rules of the game. It has to be believable and inevitable, and yet I didn't see it coming. So, actually our lives are like that. I mean, my marriage is like that. I'm married to my best friend, this amazing woman, and I meeting her was a complete surprise. It's not something I ever could have planned. Writing The Go-Giver with Bob Burg was a complete surprise. It wasn't something I sought. I'm getting off topic there, but so how do you create suspense? It's kind of the opposite of giving a lecture or a lecturing in the worst sense. Lecturing in the sense of just talking at people. Obviously, if you give a great public talk, you don't do this. You tell stories in a great public talk. But when you're just lecturing at people, when you're just telling people something, when you're just talking at people, let's say you're mansplaining. I'll use current terminology.
Okay.
That's this awful form of communication where you're not listening, you're just talking. Suspense is created by questions. What creates suspense is you pose questions, and not only do you not know the answer, but you can't even imagine what the answer is. Like, where is this going? Like, where did that come from? The classic thriller is kind of a whodunit. Who somebody got dead. It's murder in there. And so who killed the person? But you don't need murder to have mystery. There's mystery in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because the moment you see the title, you go, wow, what are those? How well does Stephen Covey unwrap those 7 habits, the stories he tells that reveal them? It's not a super suspenseful book, but he unwraps beautifully. So suspense is about setting up a question and then unwrapping the answer piece by piece in a way that every little morsel is delicious and every little morsel leaves you wanting more. I don't know if that's a good way of describing it, but that's the best way I can think of.
I know. Well, I know it's just this hard, I think of storytelling, and there's like so many things, it's this beautiful blend of both science and art, right? Like there's structure, there's a lot of structure to it. And I think, a lot of it is artistic, even to hear you describe it. I mean, to go, okay, I know I need to create an ending that is inevitable but unpredictable. That's how I captured what you were saying, right? It's like, of course it had to end that way, but I didn't see that coming. And then you go, okay, I have to create questions along the way. And so, do you just create questions through characters, or like, what if it is a nonfiction type of writing? I mean, obviously, if it's a parable, which maybe is what you're saying, like you've really come around to enjoying parables and novels because you've got, I presume, that you've got these characters and these kind of dynamics that can create questions without just kind of posing, well, I was on a mission to understand, the answer to this problem, and so I spent 5 years researching it, and here's what I found. Is that kind of thing? Yeah,
and if you look at, if you look at great nonfiction writing, and I'll give you an example, Malcolm Gladwell. You take a book like Blink, or a book, The Tipping Point, or he's got so many of these that are along the same lines, where they take the hero of the story is not a person. The hero of the story is a concept. It's like an idea. Like The Tipping Point, it's how little things make a big impact. That isn't the exact word, but something like that, right? So he takes an idea and he unwraps it using a lot of stories. He does exactly what you do when you're on stage, or what any good speaker does when you're on stage. You have an idea you want to convey to your audience, and you convey it by stringing stories together, little vignettes from your life or other people's lives. Because when you can frame a principle around real people or real characters, it comes to life for people. So Aesop could have said, if you're slow and steady, if you're careful at what you're doing, you're gonna get there sooner. But people will go, yeah, actually, Aesop, that's great. So instead, he creates this hare and this tortoise. And now you go, well, who's going to win the race? I think the hare's going to win. That's obvious, right? But it must be not him. It must be the tortoise because he's the slow one. But how is that going to work? It's like, it's interesting suddenly. That's an example of a story. The parables in the Bible, in the New Testament, are great examples of teaching tools, teaching stories that make principles come to life with characters. But so back to your question, for me, the answer is yes. You said, do you create these questions through characters? I do. I do. I set up, for me, whether I'm writing a novel or a parable, there's a basic idea of kind of the setup. Like when Bob and I started working on The Go-Giver, he already had the title. We kind of knew the point of the story. Not kind of. We knew the point of the story. The point of the story was, if you put your focus on others more than yourself, on what you can provide in value, as opposed to what you can get in value in any situation, your life will be better. That was the point. We could have done The Go-Giver in a sentence.
In a sentence, yeah.
That's it. The point of my novel, Steel Fear, is a disgraced Navy SEAL stalks a serial killer on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And obviously, you figure the point is going to be he gets caught, we think, we hope. You can kind of tell the story in a sentence. But then you create these characters, and then you just breathe enough life into them so that they feel real. And then you see what happens, and you start asking questions like, well, what happens when he goes here? What happens when he goes there? Joe, at the beginning of The Go-Giver, has a problem. What's his problem? He's in a business. He's frustrated. What's he frustrated about? I don't know. We didn't know. So you start asking questions. The beauty of doing that in both a parable and a novel is that I, the writer, don't necessarily know the answers. It's like, I work to figure out what the answers are. I work to follow the story and see where is this going. And so when you, the reader, start to follow the breadcrumbs from page to page, I was doing the same thing you were a few months earlier. I didn't know either. When
so
Bob
you don't have the whole arc mapped out.
Right.
Like you kind of know the ultimate destination, like you're saying, like the premise, if you will, of the book.
Right.
But like, you kind of know, okay, this is the very end, and then you kind of go, okay, here's a couple characters, and then you just kind of like day by day you go, what if this happened? What if that happened? Like how would these people interact?
What feels right? Exactly. What feels right? What seems, and I'll give you a great example. There's, The Go-Giver has several books in the Parable series, and by the way, there's a fourth one coming. We got the Go-Giver, the Go-Giver Leader, the Go-Giver Influencer, which I want to talk about for a sec because it is an example. And then in the spring, we're going to have the Go-Giver Marriage, which my wife and I co-wrote this one. So we're excited about that. But in the Go-Giver Influencer, the third book, the basic premise of the book is it's about seeing other people's points of view. It's like we could have called it the Go-Giver Negotiator. It's about people who see things differently, turning an argument into a resolution, turning an opposition into an alliance. That's the basic thesis of the book. And so we start out with two characters who are in a tough negotiation, and they're basically opponents. And we knew that by the end of the book, there was going to be some really cool resolution that neither of them saw coming, but which would totally work. And the thing of it was, neither of us saw it coming either. Like, we didn't know what that resolution was going to be. So it's like we set up the situation. So I wonder how this is going to resolve. We know what was going to happen at the end. It was going to resolve. How? We were discovering it in the process. So I think you mentioned earlier, there's a balancing act, sort of the science and the art. There's a structure side to writing, and there's kind of a flow side to writing. And you'll hear writers debate about whether you should use an outline or not. They call them plotters versus pantsers. Plotters figure out a plot first. This is what James Patterson does. Figure out a plot, and then you kind of write the story. Pantsers, like writing by the seat of your pants, pantsers just start at page 1 and go. Stephen King says he's a pantser. And I think this debate is a little specious, because I really think that if you got inside their brains, everyone's doing a little bit of both, or a mix of both. I know for me, I always have an outline, but it isn't where it starts. This is, by the way, true for a novel, a parable. It's true for a blog post. It's true for an article I'm going to write. I'll have an outline, but it's not where I start. I'll start with just like an idea, a concept, a situation, a character, a piece of dialogue, whatever, from something that just is a spark. And it's always going back and forth between taking just random ideas and spontaneous writing stuff and kind of molding it into a structure, and then taking the structure and saying, yeah, but then what happens over here, and then messing it up again. So I go back and forth between structure and flow. I even have 2 different places in my room where I do it. I'm sitting at my structure place in my desk. And over there in the corner, over there in the corner, I have my overstuffed chair, which is where I sit with a pad of paper and a pen and just make stuff up.
Interesting.
And have no idea what's coming.
So well, maybe talk to us about characters, right? Like, how do you develop a character? Because I've started watching, I've started paying attention to this a lot in recent years, because one of the things I realized is like, gosh, I have to become a better storyteller. Like, to what you're saying, I've realized if I want to get my points across more effectively, I have to become a better storyteller, which actually for me has been frustrating. Like, I love the boring, just give me the information. And it's hard because as a consumer, I actually do like that. But I think it's very rare. Like, people, they have to be engaged and entertained. And, if you just deliver the punchline, it's not punchy if there isn't that suspense or that conflict along the way. Doesn't sink in. And so I'm like, well, crap, I have to learn how to do this thing I'm not naturally good at, and I don't really love, or didn't really love.
Excellent.
With storytelling. And so, I think of one of our favorite shows is Modern Family. I mean, it is our favorite show. We've watched. Have you ever seen the show?
Completely, totally, yes. I love it. Yeah.
So we have seen every single episode in every season. Every one of them we have seen at least 6 or 7 times. Every single episode. And what I realized finally after years now of watching the show is going, oh, there is a formula to this, which is basically each episode, they start with these characters who have very salient features. So each character has very distinct features. And then every episode, they basically say, okay, what if we put these 3 characters together and these 2 characters together and these ones, and then go, what would happen if these extreme personalities got paired up in these different arrangements? And then I kind of feel like, I think that maybe is how they're writing.
Yeah, like a chemistry set.
Like a chemistry set, yeah. Like, I'm mixing these things together. But, so how do you develop characters? Where do you come up with these, ideas? And if you're just, if you're doing it, if you're a pantser and you're just kind of like letting it flow, how do you do it to where it doesn't suck and isn't boring?
Yeah, so for me, by the way, I'm much more structure oriented than flow oriented. It's more my nature.
Okay.
I have kind of a very methodical nature. I come at it like a composer, and I was a composer before I was a writer, and classical music was my training, my upbringing, and so I think like a symphonic composer, which is a very structural thing. So a couple things about characters. First thing I want to say is the fact that you said you're naturally suck at this is awesome, because if you come to something from a place of not being naturally inclined to do it, you can become so great. Like, I'll give you an example. I started doing these military books with Brandon Webb, my Navy SEAL friend. I know nothing about the military. It's like writing a book in German when I don't speak German and I have to learn the language just to write the book. But, there's no one who loves the English language like somebody who was brought up somewhere else, who learns it as their second language. That was my dad's case. He came from Germany, and he he loved English like no Native American would ever love. So that's the first thing. I don't come up with these characters automatically. I don't consider myself gifted at this naturally. Like Stephen King just kind of shakes his arms and colorful characters spill out. I'm not like that. So I'll start out with a character. And by the way, one of my writing teachers says that before you start a novel, you spend weeks and weeks and weeks writing character profiles, where like you ask all these questions, you answer them all, and you come to know this character like better than you know your brother. And then you start the novel. I tried, and I couldn't really do it.
Interesting.
When I start a character, when I create a character, he's kind of like a stereotype or a caricature at first. So like, Joe and Pindar. Joe is this sort of, struggling young business guy, and Pindar is this wise old mentor. Or in my novel, there's this captain, the ship captain, who's a jerk. He's an ass. And it would have been so easy to make him like a cartoon villain. So then what I do is I do something very much like what you do in real life. I used to run a sales organization, and I had people who were terrified of making cold calls and terrified of making sales calls. And they would say, when I get in the phone, it's like, I freeze up because I feel like I don't know, I've got all the stuff I want to say, but it feels canned, it feels hollow. And so my thing was, when you get on the phone, ask yourself the question, who is this person I'm talking to? Yeah, you got your product, your service, you got your stuff, you got your pattern, you got all that. That's already in your head. So just let that go for a moment. Ask the question, who is this person I'm talking to? Not like, what do they need so I can sell them, but just who are they? I'm just curious. Be curious about the person. And not, you can't grill them like third degree. Where did you come from? Where'd you grow up? How many siblings do you have? But just be curious. That's what it's like with a character. I just get curious with these characters. This guy is a jerk of a leader. He's a aircraft carrier captain that is a terrible leader. He doesn't have any sympathy for his people. He doesn't talk to his people. No one really looks up to him. They just do because they have to, because that's their position, but they don't naturally because they think he's a jerk. Okay. What is he most worried about? What concerns him most? When a problem comes up, how does he react? It's like, I just get curious about it and start asking questions. And you start just like popping up little details about somebody, the way they respond, the way they say certain like catchphrases will come out, or certain ways of talking will come out. And they start to come to life. I still find it challenging for me. It's not something I come to naturally. So I have to work at it, which is good, because that means I have to make it happen. And that's true with everything I write, whether it's a parable or it's a novel or anything else. Or for that matter, if I'm writing a principle, like I'm writing a blog post about, leadership. Well, I say to myself, give me an example of that. I try to think of an event that's happened in my life that somehow reflects that. And I think of the people in that event. I'm always asking myself questions. What does that look like when it actually happens? So that's kind of where it's at. In the novel, there are a lot of things that happen, or a lot of situations or characters. They were vaguely echoes of real characters and real people. Just because that's where I went, the well I dipped into to start to make it come to life. You'll hear film actors talk about how in order to play this role, they had to access this memory of their own experience. Like in order to play this grieving father, they had to access when their dog died and how sad they were. And I used to think that's so pretentious. That's like actors speaking, Hollywood actors, that's how they talk. But as a writer, I started realizing that's really true. When you want to write somebody who's grieving, you go find a place in your life where you've grieved and you remember that, and it kind of opens that door for you. And so I think the real skill, to answer your question about where characters come from, it's empathy. It's all empathy. You tap your empathy. And that's where I think stories and characters that's the wellspring that they come out of.
Wow. That is so good. That is so powerful. I think suspense, plot lines, being curious, characters, coming from empathy, really, really great stuff, John. I just admire so much what you do, and you're truly an artist in the way you've been able to apply it across so many different things. Where do you want people to go? Okay, you mentioned this book, How to Write Good, or at least Gooder, which is an ebook that you have. Or where do you want people, if they want to connect with you, or people who are aspiring writers or just wanting to be better at the craft of writing? How can they learn more about you?
Yeah, it's funny because the book itself grew out of podcasts and interviews just like this, conversations like this, where people would ask questions about writing, and I'd come up with an answer and say, I should write that down. I only meant to do a little like 12, 14, 18 page little sort of ebook article, and it turned into a full-fledged book. So here it is, masquerading as a physical book. I'm doing it right now, as you said, just as an ebook. It's a free download on my website. I imagine someday I'll really publish it and it'll become a real boy like Pinocchio. But right now, it's an ebook that you can get free on my site, which is just my name, johndavidmann.com. And you go to johndavidmann.com and you'll see up there, ebook, free ebook, whatever. That's what this is.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, thank you for the work that you put into this, because your characters are delightful, and they're everything that you just described. They're dynamic. They are real. They are multidimensional. They are people that we have all met in real life, which makes sense because they're people that you have met. They're based on those, and specifically the way that you weave a tale into. You can take one simple principle that is a sentence, like it literally could be a tweet. And from that, you extrapolate this beautiful, wonderful, entertaining, uplifting, curious, page-turning story. That's just such a more enriching way to get to that destination, and a more effective one too. And so we really appreciate your work, and we appreciate you very much sharing several of your secrets here with us for free.
I certainly appreciate it too. I love being here, and I have to say, in the balance between telling a story versus teaching a principle, the parable, you're always doing both. It's a tricky balance because, in my mind, the story has to always lead. The story has to be king, because the principle only works if the story is king. I got to the end of Steal Fear, the novel, and turned around, looked back, and realized that it was teaching a leadership principle. It's like it's a parable. It's a leadership parable disguised as a crime novel. So my parable habits, will never die, I guess. It's like they don't go away.
That is awesome. That's awesome. Well, we wish you the best, my friend. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your support after all these years.
Yeah, we'll do it again, a couple years away.